Have you ever wanted to learn the Hebrew alphabet, but you haven't? Or maybe it's been a long time since you've learned it and you want to review? Well, join me in this next set of videos to go over each and every letter. Get a pencil and a notebook and start practicing along with me. Shalom, welcome to Rob on the Rock. I'm Rob Van Hoff, and today we're starting a series on the Hebrew alphabet. So if you've wanted to learn the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, but you haven't yet done that, or if you learned them in the past and you want to review, I'm going to dedicate a series of videos taking us letter by letter on what I call just the simple block formation. This is not going to be learning the modern cursive Hebrew. Our orientation will be the biblical Hebrew in terms of vocabulary, but also we'll be looking at manuscripts. And I will often refer to manuscripts from the Second Temple period, primarily from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and also from the later Masoretic Tiberian tradition, so that you will be exposed to different eras of the Hebrew letter formation. And we'll then learn not only to write the letters and to recognize them by name, but also to be able to see them in different snapshots in history. And that will give us a better overall picture or concept of each of the letters. And so what I will be doing is taking us through in a kind of a classroom tone. For those of you who will be watching these videos, I encourage your participation. This video won't be like I did all through 2021, was to kind of convey information. What I hope to do in this series is to encourage participation, where you're actually building new motor skills. And through repetition and practice and dedicated attention, you will build your own skill set, your own competency for the world of writing Hebrew letters. And eventually we'll build that into some vocabulary learning as well. This will not be a Hebrew grammar. For that, I encourage students who are already ready for such a thing, or students who at the end of this series are interested in continuing official proper Hebrew grammar, to sign up for Tim Haig's class on beginning biblical Hebrew at Torah Resource Institute. All I'm doing here is pausing and to investigate each independent letter at a much slower pace. So this pace, consider this more of a way to just quiet out the noise of the world, to turn off the internet in terms of not this video, of course, but the constant bombarding of advertisements and news items and other kinds of noise, and to just set apart a little bit of time for each of these letters, and a little bit of time for your practice. And what you will be doing is entering into the world of the ancient scribes, because we're going back before the printing press. We're going back to where the Word of God was preserved by individual scribes who sat down and actually put pen to parchment or papyrus or whatever it was. So you're learning an ancient skill of the scribe. And so there's all sorts of things involved with that in terms of how the Lord designed our brain. You'll be learning those new motor skills, but you're also going to be having new little trees of neurons firing in your brain. So you'll be changing your brain as you learn these skills. And this learning would apply, this kind of motor skill development would apply if you're learning a musical instrument, or you're learning to dribble a basketball and shoot baskets, So that's the development of this skill and all the neural and muscular coordination that's happening is about our learning in general. But what we're doing is we're taking our understanding of that and concentrating on the specific skill of writing the Hebrew letters and then ultimately forming words and recognizing these letters. We want that to be second nature. We want to make that part of ourselves. There's so much misinformation out there that there are people who have profited off of other people's ignorance in this domain. And what I would like to offer is a participatory discipline where we write these out together, and that you will learn as the conversation develops over the course of the series of this video, of these videos, is you'll gain your own wisdom, your own competency, and then that will be kind of like a strong foothold for yourself that will help you grow in your discernment when you encounter other people trying to sell you this or that about the Hebrew language or any other language. So here we go. So because this is our first video, we're going to do Alef, which is our first letter, Alef. So have a notebook and some pens. I like those Pilot G series of pens. They have a real nice writing feel, or a pencil is fine as well. You could even do crayons. You know, if you're younger or older and you like to use crayons, that's fine too. I have a mock screen here of a mock-up of lined paper. You do not have to use lined paper. You could use simple college rule or something like this that has the dash and the halfway mark. So this is what I'll use, and I'm using this just to give you a sense of proportion and how the formation of the letters with a reference to a stable background. So we're going to first look at the letter Alef. So I guess I could write this up here. We would spell it A-L-E-P-H in English. Sometimes you might see it with Alef like this. And of course, the Alef is where we get the word alpha in Greek. Comes from that same alpha. We see this alpha, or the letter A, and that's a lambda, and then a phi, which is basically the same letter A, right? That we call it where we get the alphabet. So Alef is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and there are many acrostic psalms in the scriptures, acrostic poems. One of the most famous, of course, is Psalm 119, and the first 8 verses. Each of those first 8 verses begins with the letter Alef. So the way I form the Alef is, so I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here, and basically I write it like so. And because I'm kind of writing bigger than I normally do, it's going to be kind of squiggly. But it's a line that starts in the upper left and goes down to the right across. And it's not like an X. It's not that. That's not what we want. What we want is something like that. And it's not an N. It's not a letter N. So to the extreme would be like a letter N, capital letter N. The other extreme would be like an X. Well, it's like halfway between the N and the X. So we do have that horizontal line from the upper left to the lower right, but then we have 2 additional strokes like that. That's our Alef. I'll do another row of Alef here. Maybe I'm going to make my pen just a little bigger. Let's try that. So you want to write a bunch of these across the page. And don't worry about erasing and going back. If you make one that looks, let's say, like that, that's okay. And just recognize, I want that spot in the middle. I want that a little broader. So you can do that. And if you're like me and you make squiggly lines while you're trying to do a straight line, that's fine too. When I slow down, it's harder for me to make it straight. So there's our letter Aleph. And this is really close, as we're going to look at the Great Isaiah Scroll. Maybe you've heard of the Great Isaiah Scroll. It's a pretty cool sounding name, isn't it? The Great Isaiah Scroll. Well, what does it sound like? Well, it's a giant scroll of the book of Isaiah. And it was found at this archaeological site of Qumran, which is at the northwest corner area of the Dead Sea in the land of Israel. And the Great Isaiah Scroll was written, scholars calculate by looking at a number of analytical features of the manuscript, that it was probably written around 125 BC. 125 BC. So if you imagine, if we just say Yeshua was born at the year 0, which he wasn't, he was born probably 5 or 6 BC. But if we just say Yeshua was born at the year 0, just for comparison, the Great Isaiah Scroll was already well over 100 years old when Yeshua was born. Isn't that neat? 100 years old. And it has survived now an additional 2,000 years. So it is pushing 2,200 years old. And it's preserved in Israel in what we call the shrine of the book. And it's pretty neat. We're going to look at some pictures of it here pretty soon. But what we're going to see is that the way the Aleph that I'm making here is not far different from that of the Scribe who lived in the 2nd century BC. So he was a man, obviously, by the time of 125 BC. So let's just say he was in his 20s. He could have very well have been born in 150 BC. And what do we know about that time frame? That's under the Maccabean era. So that's not too long. That's less than, he would have been born with the memories of the Maccabean victory, which we celebrate for Hanukkah, would have been only, 20 years old. That would be similar in our world to being born, if someone was born around 1800 in the United States, just right after the American Revolution. And so, something like the celebration of the 4th of July and things like that would be really fresh in cultural memory. And that's the time frame of the Great Isaiah Scroll. So here's a series of Alephs I've written here, and they're kind of sloppy, but take your time, and I'll do one more. I'm going to erase those I'm going to change color too. I like a blue. Let's do a darker blue color here. I'm going to write them a little quicker. No, that's kind of sloppy. I do better if they're smaller, but because I'm trying to write so you can see them. And see, sometimes I'm not even connecting. Like right here, if I zoom in, you don't want to do that. You want to have a good connection all the way around. Oops. So you want to write this Aleph many, many, many times until it comes to second nature. And if you kind of look at here, there's really like a box around it. See how those upper and lower corners really are above one another. This one here it's a little bit cattywampus. So you want to evaluate your formation of those letters. And maybe you've got different colors, and you could go and use ink pens of different colors. But again, you don't want to get caught up on a mistake. If you see yourself making that mistake more than once, then slow way down. Like I did here, I did this sloppy where let me do this. I have 2 areas on this one that I'm not happy with. I went over right there. I crossed the line, and here I didn't go far enough. So that's something I want to pay attention. I just want to remember I don't need to go back and erase what I did, but I can go and then I can just, next time I do it, I'll try to be a little slower. You're not going for perfection here. You're just going for consistency. Okay. What we're going to do here is we're going to shift gears, and I want to look at, we're going to go back to that great Isaiah scroll, and I want you to look at the text and see if you can identify the Alefs. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to this website. It's a website that I'll have posted below here. It's from Israel Museum. So here I can zoom in and out. Here's a picture of the beginning where you see my head is the upper right-hand corner. But we're going to look here. I'm going to zoom in as far as I can, which is, I think, can I go one more click? Let me see. No, that's it. I'm maxed out. And what I'm going to read is where, if you can see my little hand here, it says, Hadavar Asher Chaza Yeshia ben Amoz al Yehuda v'Yerushalayim. And what that means is, Hadavar Asher Chaza Yeshia, the matter which Isaiah saw. Isaiah ben Amoz, Isaiah son of Amoz. Curiously here, the great Isaiah scroll spells Isaiah without it's not Yeshayahu, but just Yeshia, whereas the Masoretic text has Yeshayahu, Isaiah. So it's the same name, just whether we have the Yah at the end or Yahu. And then also one other curious point here is it says V'Yerushalayim with the dual ending with a Yod Mem, a Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, whereas the Masoretic text has no Yod there. It just says Yerushalem, but they add the dual in the vocalization. So you still read it Yerushalayim, but they do not preserve the Yod. So there are textual variances between the great Isaiah scroll and the Masoretic version of Isaiah, but there's no difference in meaning. Now, this is Isaiah 2, verse 1. This is just one example where there is at least two different spelling variations, but it does not alter meaning. But what we're looking at, again, I'm zoomed in all the way, and let's just look through the first word here, Hadavar. Do you see anything that looks like an Alef? I wish I could make it a little bigger, but I can't. The second word, Asher. Is there anything that looks like an Alef? Well, if you notice the first letter there, you'd be correct. That is an Alef. Let's continue. Chazah, he saw. Nothing like an Alef there. This is that word Isaiah, Yeshia. Yod Shin Ayin, Yod He, nothing. Ben, Bet Nun, no. Amoz, Isaiah son of Amoz. Well, look at that first letter. The first letter of Isaiah's father's name, Amoz, is an Alef. So in Isaiah 2, verse 1, we see two Alefs for the word Asher, which is that word which, the word which, or the word about which, something like that, or word that. And then, so that's Asher, and then Amoz. And in both cases, I'm going to go back to our little scribble pad here. In both cases, we see, I need to go to black because that's what he has. Erase those. And I'm just going to write it on a smaller line here. We see basically that. It's a 3-stroke Alef. look back one more time. Right here. So the first stroke is the upper left to the lower right, and then we put the two smaller strokes in both cases. Now that's different than what we're going to see when we come forward to around the year 1000. Here we're looking at what's called the Washington Pentateuch. And what we see here, this is from the Torah portion, what's called Noach. These are the generations of Noach. Well, see if you can recognize an Alef here. Ele toldot Noach. Noach ish tzadik tamim haya b'dorotav. Et ha'elohim hithalach Noach. So these are the generations of Noah. Noah, ish tzadik, was a righteous man. Tamim haya b'dorotav. He was tamim, which means upright or blameless. He did not damage. He did not cause damage in the world. And then it says, Et ha'elohim hithalach Noach. With Elohim, Noah walked or conducted himself with Elohim. Well, let's look again for Alefs. Well, look at this first word here. Ele, that's the word for these. Notice that. That is an Alef. Toldot Noach, Noach ish tzaddik. See this? There's another Alef. So here we have one Alef right above the other. We have the Alef for Ele, right above the Alef for ish. Then we have a few more. Look over here to the left. Et. There's an Alef. Ha-Elohim. We see an Alef. So there's, about 4 Alefs here in the first verse of Parashat Noach in the book of Genesis. And what we notice here is that the Alefs of these particular Tiberian scribes, now remember this is the 10th century, so this is 1,000 years after the Great Isaiah Scroll. Well, actually, probably 11 to 1,200 years after that scroll was made. They're making Alefs a little different. And so how are they being made? Well, let's go back to our board here, and I'll show you. Let's see here. I want to get to where you can see. Okay. How they're making the Alef is a little more sophisticated. It's as if they do a line that's not all the way, and then a squiggle, and then a kind of squiggle like that, and then a final like that. So it's pretty fancy. And if we go back, I wonder if I could zoom in any more. I can zoom in even more on that, see how big I can get. So because I don't have that nib, that's wide on one plane and narrow on the other, I can't fully approximate it. But what I can do is probably, let me try something. Let me try this. Here we go. Learn something new every day. So I'm going to try to approximate that Alef. And I'm going to make my nib maybe even thicker. Let's try that. So what I'm going to do is my first stroke looks like that. Now I don't have that nice flat edge. And then we see this sort of move. Again, it doesn't capture without the proper calligraphy style pen. I don't get that the contrast between the sharp and the wide. And then the final stroke is a little loop-de-loo. It connects this top and goes down. Oops. If I take too long on that, it doesn't allow me to. Tries to make an angle. Boom, 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 like that. Now I'm kind of maybe exaggerating that move a little. Let me erase that and we'll do one more. Something like that. Boom, 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 boom. So I'm not used to writing in this fancy kind of Hebrew, and of course I don't have the correct pen, but this is what you can do. You can practice this fancy type of Aleph, and if you have the proper calligraphy pens, then you can really dial that in, and we can see, you know, how the range of consistency between this upper Aleph for Ele and then the lower Aleph for Ish. They're written by the same scribe. Obviously, the Ele or the Aleph from Ele is a little bit wider, whereas, you know, it's the Aleph for Ish kind of looks like it's leaning back a little bit. But in any case, the same scribe is making these letters. Let's look at one more of his, the one for Et. You can see it again right here. It's a beautiful Aleph. I really like it. And with this program, I don't know how to do the, I'm going to make it a little narrower. I don't know if there is such a way to get the nib to be a calligraphy nib so I could better approximate it. But it does start with that smaller stroke and then something like that. And again, like that. That's our Aleph. But that's the kind of Aleph that's going to be much slower in formation. And it's going to be a situation where you're taking great care and you're taking your time. Whereas, you know, if we contrast that, well, if I zoom out, let's see, how do I zoom out here? And you see, you know, the beauty of the layout of the entire page. You see two different sizes of text. You see the main text of the scripture, and then you see the Masoretic comments. And let's just look up there and let's find an Aleph up there. So here you see Ele Hadvarim. I wonder how big. Oh, that's as big as I can make it. So he's using, he's making the Aleph the same way. It's made the same way that we've been looking at, but he's using a much smaller nib. He's using a pen with a much smaller nib, Ele, and so that's our Aleph. But a lot of care and precision and planning for the layout of this manuscript of the Torah. When we compare that with, for example, the Great Isaiah Scroll, it's real bare bones. And of course, another point of differentiation between these two manuscripts is that the Great Isaiah Scroll is indeed a scroll. It is a giant roll-up piece of leather or stitched together. You can see here the stitches even, different pieces stitched together. Whereas the Washington Pentateuch, like all the other Masoretic products of the 10th century, are codices. It's a codex. It's a book. It's got pages that you flip through. So the technology had shifted over that 1,000-year period. I'm not going to be looking at the Paleo-Hebrew letter Aleph at this point. Perhaps when I finish going through all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, we can go back through then and at a more accelerated rate review the history of what we call the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet. And of course, with the Aleph, there's a few different formations. There's one that looks like this, and later one that looks like this. And so that's something we can look at a future point in time. For now, the goal is just to recognize and to be able to produce from memory the block Hebrew Aleph, just like this. Because it's quick, it's easy, and we're going to be following along the scribal approach that we see here at the Dead Sea Scrolls. Someone who's just going to write out Scripture, and they're not overly focused on what the text looks like. Of course, here we have clean columns, but the point is to maximize the use of this parchment. So to fill it from top to bottom with text, very minimal margin, of course, much smaller print, many lines per column, small handwriting, no vowel points or anything like that. Whereas the Pentateuch, of course, the typical Pentateuch of the Tiberian Masoretic scribes is much more visually prepared, visually planned, very careful and beauty of the text, and the layout is given a very high priority. So they had much more time and care and cultivated scribal skill behind the Masoretic products, in contrast, again, with that of the Great Isaiah Scroll. So I hope that this video will be helpful for you and encouraging. As I mentioned before, I want this to be participatory for you to build, get a notebook and some pencils or pens, different colors even, and practice and follow along with me in these videos and obtain skill for yourself. Be patient with yourself, be kind with yourself, set apart this time to practice so you can turn off the noise of the world and you can just learn building blocks that will be well-founded and sure. And we'll build on this little by little, and we'll build good knowledge and skill. Shalom.